guys would sit and argue about, like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that. What? I've never liked the Green Party. Why does it say I like the Green Party?
I don't even know what the Green Party
I
is.
agree with everything they say, but I can't stand it.
I'm over here.
All right. We talked about liberalism. We talked about conservatism. We talked about how that impacts things like the slave trade, how it impacts slavery. We just talked about how it related to women, right? Another ism. We're about to get another ism directly related to the French Revolution. Yay! Okay, like all isms, I want to be clear. Sometimes, in fact, in recent history, nationalism oftentimes has been viewed as being a negative thing. I'm not saying it's not. It can be very negative. But like any ism, it's really only as good or as bad as the people that practice it. Okay? Nationalism develops out of this idea. We get a new idea, a new thing. We're going to talk about this. It's a direct result of the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, ending the 30 Years' War. We have a new system of political organization. You're all quite familiar with them. They are, of course, the nation state. This is a relatively new development in human history. The concept of a nation only really develops after 1648, and it's really not until about 100 years later, till the 1750s, that it really does become sort of the basis of socio-political organization in Western Europe. By about 1750s, though, we're no longer defining ourselves as we did in the Middle Ages, right? Whoever's the dude at the top, that's what you are. It doesn't matter anymore. We have this new system of community, what is known as the nation. By the 1750s, they're pretty much everywhere in Western Europe. By 1800, it is the system of socio-political organization. Still is today, isn't it?
Yes.
It's different from other ways we've grouped ourselves before. Nation is bigger, nationality is bigger than your clan, right? Your extended family. It is bigger than your religious identity, right? It is bigger than your regional identity. It is usually built upon, I say usually because this is not true of our nation. But it is usually built upon an idea of shared language. It is usually built upon an idea of shared customs or cultures. It is usually built upon a shared value system. It is usually built upon a shared historical experience. I said not ours, but now that I think about it, that's not actually accurate. We don't have necessarily a shared language in this country, because do we have a national language? No. No. We have no official language. But do we have shared values in the United States? I would say so. You know, whether you live in, Mississippi or whether you live in Hawaii, you probably generally like the idea of democracy. Right? We don't really have one culture in this country. We have regional cultures. We have cultures, in some cases, right, some states have their own specific culture, different from other states. We have certain ethnic minorities in this country that have their own specific cultures. So we don't really have one specific culture, but we do have shared values. We have shared general customs. There are some commonalities amongst Americans, despite all of our differences. We all seem to think that if we are talking to somebody that doesn't know English, if we speak really, really loudly and really, really slowly, suddenly that person can understand English. We also do weird things like say hi and smile at strangers.
I do that.
Yeah. People in Europe don't do that. My friends I know, my few friends I have that are from Europe, all think that's the weirdest thing about Americans. It's like you're walking down the street and you see some dude and you have no idea who this person is, but you both kind of nod at each other and say sup, right? They're like, what? You don't know that person. Why would you say hi to them? You're like, because it's polite. What's wrong with you, Euro trash? Yeah. That's a very Idaho thing.
What's a very Idaho thing?
Waving on, like, if you're on a country road and you pass somebody, waving at them.
Oh.
Yeah, two or three finger wave, yeah. You got the steering wheel version too.
And
You got the door version.
The way you nod to someone is how you show whether you know them. When you lift your chin up, you know the person. When you put your chin down, it means you don't know the
I
person.
did not know there was rules to that. That's interesting.
It's like a psychological.
I get around, I curtsy.
I
I'm gonna start doing that. I'll see people hold it.
Like when I.
Like that 19th century sort of like male aristocrat curtsy, like, oh. Dude, Hobson, you ever notice Hobson kind of looks like Henry VIII?
Yes.
Like in a
Yeah.
good way?
Okay,
Like in a good way?
always think that. Pull up a picture.
We gotta get Hobson
We
to like
got-
start standing with like a well-turned ankle.
We need to get dressed up like Henry VIII for Halloween.
That seemed mean. I'm not trying to say like he's like big or anything like that. He just like his beard and it's red gives him a very sort of Henry VIII vibe. Somebody needs to convince him to dress like Henry VIII one day. Ask him to dress like Henry VIII.
If it offends him, say he looks very kingly.
Dude, Henry VIII was like awesome, right? Like,
Yeah, until
dude, made England important. Like, couldn't like just like all of the babes wanted him, right?
I mean,
found a very good way to get out of toxic relationships. Horrible.
nice.
Yeah, I feel like I just accidentally really insulted Hobson. He's not like Henry VIII at all. He was a monster. Hobson is a wonderful teddy bear of a human being. Probably. The biggest thing about nations, though, the most defining feature of nations is this: boundaries. Those boundaries are defined. They are invisible lines that are defined, and they're what, I mean, think about it, right? What makes us as Americans is that we live inside the boundaries of the United States. Right? That's sort of the definitive version, right? If you live within the borders of Germany, you're a German. Although not at this time, because Germany's not a thing yet. But we're getting there. Aren't you excited? Germany's about to be a thing.
Yeah.
So, out of this new idea of nation states, we get nationalism. Nationalism is the idea that your nation should come first. There's two distinct early types of nationalism. The first is cultural nationalism. Cultural nationalism is very closely associated with Germany. As we've talked about before, Germany isn't a thing until 1871. What was it before that?
A territory.
Sort of. Okay, sort of. We had the Holy Roman Empire, right? Which was composed of about 300 separate, independent political units that all sort of agreed that some Habsburg dude would be the emperor, right? But there's not a German country. There's not a German nation. There's Germans, but no Germany, okay? You have this guy in the mid-1700s, early 1800s, Johann Gottfried von Herder. Von Herder argues, he praises the German people, the Volk. It literally is just German for folk. Yeah, you go to Germany, you're like, oh, I love some Bob Dylan and his folk music. Bob Dylan? Despite, listen up, check this out. Here's why this is so important for Germany. Despite there not being a German nation, there was widely recognized as German people. If you lived in Austria, you were German. If you lived in Hesse-Kassel, you were German. If you lived in Prussia, you were German. If you lived in the Rhenish Palatinate, you're German, right? So there's Germans, but no Germany. And what united the Germans together? How do we know there's Germans? Well, there's a bunch of people. They all speak the same language. German. They all have the same sort of folklore, right? Same sort of cultural traditions. Or at least variations of them. You're not going to see a lot of dudes in lederhosen in Prussia, for example. That's a Bavarian thing. But it's not like if somebody's from Bavaria and they travel to, Berlin, that Prussians would be like, well, I don't know what this guy's saying. They totally speak each other. They totally understand each other. They have shared language. They have shared music, shared folklore. They are united as a people, but they're a nationality without a nation. He argues for this idea, the Volksgeist. What a great German word. Oh, dude, yeah. I wish I had actually gone to class more and paid attention because it'd be rad to speak German.
I think one of the best is German for flamethrowers, flammenwerfer.
I want to speak German because my voice isn't just naturally loud, so I can just be angry at everybody.
German words always sound cool, right?
I feel loud.
You know my favorite thing about German too is when they don't have a name for something, they just combine pre-existing words to come up with a new thing.
I do that all the time. Like
Like Panzerkampfwagen.
I'm pretty sure the German word for like birth control is anti-baby pillar.
I'm pretty sure submarine is like under the
That's hilarious. Oh,
Pretty sure
dang.
submarine's like.
It's too bad the Germans were really, really bad the first 2 times they tried to take over the planet. Like if they were good, how fun would Earth be today? You know what I love about Germany too is they've tried twice to take over Europe and failed, right? They figured out how to do it peacefully and now they run Europe. Yeah. Say what you will about the Germans, they are tenacious. Europe will be ours. Just wait and see. It will be good. Yeah, Panzerkampfwagen. Armored field car. That's tank. That's what you call tank in Germany. An armored field car.
Rocket launchers.
My brother was talking about this
Yeah.
the other day, and he said that
Yeah,
submarines
yeah. Panzerfaust, tank fist. Armor fist. Yeah, armor fist. But yes.
What's his gun?
I don't know. Gun. My grandpa Fred, who fought in World War II, said they referred to all of the German guns as Schmeisers because one of the companies that made guns for Germany was the Schmeiser gun manufacturing, and so they just referred to all of them as Schmeisers.
I know Gewehr is rifle.
Yeah, Gewehr's rifle. Yeah. Dang, dude, I've learned a lot of German from Hearts of Iron 4.
And Battlefield.
Yeah. Okay. Cultural nationalism is just a stepping stone till we get to political nationalism. People start thinking, and this actually starts in Italy and then later spreads to, like Germany. Italy was in the same boat. We had Italians, but there was no Italy. There was a bunch of different states, a bunch of different kingdoms, but there was not one Italy. And what Italians start thinking in the 1850s is dang, if there's Italian people, maybe we should have Italy. Maybe all Italians should be united together as a country. We could call it that, Italy. Political nationalism is just taking the idea of cultural nationalism, be like, all right, look, we got Polish people. Maybe we should have a country for Polish people. We could call it the land of Poles. Or maybe Poland, that sounds better.
Poland.
Gotta love Europeans naming stuff, right? Who lives in this place? Oh, we're Finns. Finland! Now, there is a dark side to nationalism, though. If you define yourself, no countries are, let's be honest, right? No place on planet Earth is homogenous. Right? You know what homogenous means.
Probably
Right? 100% the same.
Like, think about the cells in bio.
No,
the same.
Or
just don't think about
that.
Calm down. I know you guys all get excited when you think about Mr. Myron. Calm down.
I just want to cry.
Oh, whatever. We've all seen your blogs. Mr. Myron is our favorite teacher. By collectively, you guys.
You actually got funny.
Here's
I can't believe you said that to him, though.
What'd you say to him? Wait, what'd you say to Myra?
What did you get funny? You said something funny. I go, Abby, I was like, when did you get funny? And she laughed. She goes, what'd you say? I said, when did you get funny?
What did he do? He's like,
She's
oh.
like, here's the funny.
Yeah.
I was like,
So,
you weren't the first one.
here's the thing. Since no human society is homogeneous, in every nation state that exists, there are minorities. If we're defining that to be Polish, you have to in fact be Polish. You have to speak Polish. You have to have Polish customs. You have to have the shared values of Poland. Okay? If that's what it means to be Polish, what about people who live in Poland that aren't Polish? What about Ukrainians that live in Poland? Do you see the problem that nationalism can bring? If you define yourself so narrowly, you create the other. And then you end up with a minority group that you're like, dang, they live in France, but they're not French, right? And if they're not French, is France for them? If we're Poles, if we're a bunch of Poles and we got all of us are Poles except you three who are Ukrainians. You could probably speak in Ukrainian. You be Svetlana.
Shut up, Abby. Imagine being
Yeah, you're now Svetlana. You're Svetlana, you're Piotr. I don't know.
You get way too detailed with your examples.
It's just an empty.
It's just right.
Bratislava.
I think it's
That's a capital of Slovakia. So, if we're all Poles and we all meet the standards of what it means to be Polish, and you guys aren't because you're Ukrainians, yet you're in Poland, is this really for you?
Apparently not.
Yeah, right? You see how that can get ugly really, really quick?
Yeah.
We can maybe look, if you want to be Polish, you got to drop the whole Ukrainian thing, right? You got to, where you know more Ukrainian culture, you have to act like Poles. No more speaking Ukrainian. Sorry, Abby, that's the only language you know, but you better learn Polish quick. Because if you live in Poland, you have to be Polish. And Ukrainians, they're not Polish. You see the problems, right? Or maybe, you know what? There's no fixing Ukrainians. Let's kick them out. Poland is for Poles and no one else. Make sense? You see the problems? There was one group in Europe that really stood out compared to others in most countries. These were Europe's Jews. I don't know why I just said Poland's Jews. Poland was like the one place where, weirdly enough, where you could practice Judaism with really not having to worry about much sort of stuff. Well, occasionally the Russians would mess stuff up for you, but the Poles in general, that's why the Holocaust was so devastating in Poland, was because most of Europe's Jews lived in Poland. More on that later. Jews in most of Europe stood out. In the Middle Ages, there was a official sort of segregation of Jewish populations. Jews were required to live in separate sections of towns. There's a hybrid language that develops that is a mix of mostly German and Hebrew with a little bit of Polish sprinkled in. It's what is called Yiddish. We use the Yiddish term for these separate neighborhoods that Jews in the Middle Ages were required to live in. These are what are known as ghettos. In most places, because Jews were segregated, they never assimilated into the local dominant culture of wherever they lived in Europe. Does that make sense? So by the time you get to the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, if you're in a place like France, you could tell who was Jewish because their culture was very different from French culture. They lived in their own communities. They had their own cultural traditions. It's not true everywhere. Some places, Jews assimilated into the dominant culture better. Germany was one of these places. By the time you get to 1900, it's very hard to tell who's Jewish and who, if a German is a Jewish German or a non-Jewish German. By the time you get to about 1900, a German is a German is a German, culturally. Some of them just happen to go to synagogues on Saturdays rather than churches on Sundays. Does that make sense? But other places, right, you could really tell who was Jewish based on their culture. And because they stood out, and because their culture was different, and because their religion was different than the dominant religions, Jews in Europe often made easy targets. Russia turned anti-Semitism into an art form. The Russian czars, who by the 1800s are having really major political problems. People in Russia are getting fed up with the system. They need a scapegoat. And in the mid-1700s, Russia took over most of Poland, and the large Jewish population of Poland made a nice target. The Russian state developed what are known as pogroms. A pogrom is a government-sanctioned attack on Jews. You ever seen the movie Fiddler on the Roof?
I've heard of that.
You know when like the Russian dudes like ride in on their horses and like burn the village and stuff? That's a pogrom. Those Russian dudes are all soldiers, aren't they? They're Cossacks. That's a pogrom. Anti-Semitism even spread to places that seemed very unlikely. As weird as this sounds, right? Most Europeans in the 1800s, if they heard about a pogrom in Russia, they'd be like, oh, well, that makes sense. Russia's backwards. Of course they're going to do horrible things like that. But by the time you get to the mid-1800s, anti-Semitism is spreading to Western Europe. In 1870, France begins their military tradition of losing wars to Germany. That's so totally unfair. They've only lost one war against Germany, and it was like the first one. The Franco-Prussian War of 1871. When France loses this, right? Up until this point, France was the most powerful country on mainland Europe. They had the largest, best army. So for Prussia and the other soon-to-be Germans to come in and not only beat the French, but humiliate the French. At the Battle of Verdun, they surrounded and captured the entire French army, including the Emperor Napoleon III. Always weirds me out. There's no Napoleon II. You have Napoleon Bonaparte, who's Napoleon I. He's removed from power, and then his nephew, Louis Napoleon, gets elected president, and when his term ends, he's like, you know what, I'm not done with being in office, and he crowns himself emperor.
Why would you put
No Napoleon II. Weird.
Why would they have put his?
He was very, very
President
popular. He had like one of those like little pointy goatees with a soul patch and a little like beard. Yeah.
Of course. Why would?
That's the only reason. France was humiliated. They're looking for a scapegoat. There was an officer in the French military, a guy by the name of Alfred Dreyfus, who was Jewish. He was a high-ranking officer. He was a captain. And the French decide to blame losing a war to Germany only on him. Not the fact that Napoleon III was an idiot, couldn't win a battle to save his life.
Obviously not.
Not the fact that like the Germans are like pretty decent soldiers and had way better equipment than the French did and were better trained. But they picked this one guy to blame it all on. And despite overwhelming evidence of his innocence, they find him guilty anyway. You can't make it any more dramatic than this. I always think this would make like a really good movie that make you pissed off. Because it's like, the evidence is overwhelming, right? Some other dude literally is like, no, it wasn't him. It was me that gave Germany our military secrets. And the French courts are like, well, despite you admitting you did it, Dreyfus is still guilty. What's the only thing he's guilty of? Being Jewish. That shocked a lot of people. He spends 10 years on Devil's Island before he's finally let go. But it's indicative of what's going on. Yeah.
So the Russians back to the Russians, were they just like, now all these problems in the Russian government, they're actually being caused by these Jews living in Poland.
Yeah. Well, Poland was part of Russia at the time, and it wasn't just Polish Jews; it was Jews in Ukraine, Belarus, and elsewhere too. But and it was because Jews stood out, so they made it easy. The Russians went to insane lengths to justify this. They actually published a book called "The Protocols of the Elders of Zion," which was nothing but anti-Semitic propaganda. This book claimed that there had been a plot since Roman times of Jews trying to control planet Earth. Does that make sense? This, literally 2 seconds of research disproves this book. It is filled with so many historical inaccuracies. It is incredibly, incredibly flawed. But the Russians write this, they publish it, they didn't send it everywhere in Europe. So the volume of I mean, it's like fake news, right? It's like when you get on Facebook and somebody shares a fake story, right? We've all seen this in this pandemic, right? You know, the whole like COVID is caused by 5G thing. First of all, that doesn't even make sense in any way, shape, or form.
Is that an
Second of
actual
all,
thing? though?
yes, and lots of people believe it.
It's
Right?
like the vaccines are always bad for you thing.
It's yeah. You say okay.
People are weird.
It relates to something Hitler said. Okay. You tell a lie enough, people believe it, right? And or you tell what's called the big lie, right? You make up a lie that is so obviously a lie, but you repeat it so often that eventually people start to accept part of it because they're so caught up on like the radically, inaccurate parts. Does that make sense? It's the same sort of thing. It's the same sort of thing. The Russians published this book and they literally flooded Europe with it. And it was so prevalent that after a while, people started to buy into it. Does that make sense?
It's like a more historic version of the Green Mile.
Totally, totally. European Jews start to realize, right? There was a small movement led by an Austrian Jewish newspaper man named Theodor Herzl, who is like, hey, maybe if Europeans don't want us here, maybe Jewish folks need their own country. Maybe we need our own nation. We need a nation for ourselves. This is what is known as Jewish nationalism. The proper term for Jewish nationalism is Zionism. There's a country that exists today because of Zionism. Israel. Herzl argues that the best thing for Jews would be a country of their own. Then there are a variety of schemes. The British offered to sell the Zionist Uganda. That'd be an interesting historical twist.
It's kind of fun. It just sounds like it'd be kind of funny.
Ugandriel. Israganda. I don't know. Does that make sense? We start to see Zionism also brings an element of Marxism into it, particularly not communism, but socialism. So it's kind of a mix of Jewish nationalism and socialism. Okay. One thing, getting back to France and politics and all that, Napoleon's empire really messes up Europe, doesn't it? It takes the old order and it shatters it. 1806, Napoleon gets rid of the Holy Roman Empire. That thing has been around since the 900s. And so in 1814, after the defeat of Napoleon, there is a conference organized in Vienna, Austria, what is known as the Congress of Vienna. It is organized and sort of supervised by an Austrian prince, Clemens von Metternich. And what it is we get all these European powers, right? There's Austria, there's Prussia, there's Russia, there's France, there's Britain. Then they decide, you know what? Let's prevent another massive war like what happened with Napoleon. Let's establish a balance of power. Balance of power, very descriptive. What do you think it means? Between who?
All the power.
The great powers, perfect. Yeah, it's balance between the great powers. The big idea of this, though, is that a lot of these empires, especially two, the Austrian Empire and the Russian Empire, are very, very multi-ethnic. One of the things Napoleon did is he sort of jump-started nationalism in places like Germany, in places like Italy. Napoleon created a short-lived Kingdom of Italy. He created a short-lived, what is known as the Confederation of the Rhine, sort of proto-Germany. He created what is known as the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, Poland. He sort of spread nationalism, right? The Grand Duchy of Warsaw was a French client state, but it was Poles running Poles. It was a land for Poles, right? Dare I say, a Pole land. Does that make sense? He spreads these ideas of nationalism around, along with, French republicanism and the political ideologies of liberalism. So the Congress of Vienna is trying to put a stop to these scary French things, like liberalism and especially nationalism. Places like Austria, where half the population's Hungarian, 30% of the population's German, Austrians, right? 20% of the population are Slavs. That's multi-ethnic. Russia, where it tends to be mostly Slavs, but you're all aware, Russians and Ukrainians are not the same thing. You ever really, really want to make a Ukrainian person mad? Call them Russian. Yeah. Yeah, that's not a fun experience to go through. No, but I heard somebody do it.
What happened?
What? It was this kid named Eveline, who was a Ukrainian immigrant in Kennewick when I was 8th grade. And somebody on the bus called him a Russian. And he slapped the dude, which was kind of hilarious because he was like a big, stout dude. He's just like, what? You know that Russian dude that does the professional slapping competitions? It was like that. Like Eveline was just like, and he gets in the kid's face and he goes, I am Ukrainian, not Russian. Which was like really intimidating. And that was like when Ukraine and Russia were like friends. So I can't imagine what his attitude is now. It's just like somebody calls him a Russian. He's like, I must end you. You have insulted my honor. Here's the thing though. They say, all right, no nationalism. But then they completely pull the rug out from under themselves. Not 6 years after the Congress of Vienna ends, the Greeks rebel against the Ottoman Empire. Greece had been conquered by the Ottomans way back when, and the Greeks decide, you know what? We don't want to be ran by Turks. We want to be in charge of our own destiny. We want our own kingdom. We'll call it Greece. And so the Greeks rebel. And even though the Europeans are like, no nationalism, they fall all over themselves to help out the Greeks. Isn't that supporting nationalism? It's opening Pandora's box. Because, whoa, wait a minute. Austria, Prussia, Russia, France, Britain, they all said no nationalism. But then they all rushed to help the Greeks. And suddenly we're Polish again, and we're in Russia, and we're like, you know what, this sucks. We should have our own country, a land of Poles. We should call it Poland. Let's have that. And so the Poles rise in rebellion. Is that nationalism spreading?
Yeah.
Totally. 1817, the Serbs are like, dang, if the Greeks can do it, what about us? And so the Serbs rebel against the Turks. I love that that war goes on for 50 years. Talk about tenacity. The Serbs straight up get their butt kicked for like 49 years of this war. And in the 50th year, the Turks are like, this is never ending, is it? This just, you're pretty Serbia, it's just not worth it. Like, does anybody really want Belgrade?
The Serbs.
Romania becomes, yeah, the Serbs are like, it is ours. Romania becomes a thing as a result of this. So even though the point of this is no nationalism, they all help nationalists. It's a great example of like they're stepping on a rug and they just make it out from under themselves. And they're like, why do we have problems? Moving on. Oh, dude, we could do an entire year-long class on this. It is a travesty. Your book spends like 2 pages on this, and I have 1 slide on it. Because holy cow, we've been working towards this moment. Do we have a middle class in Europe?
Yes.
Yes. Is it larger than the aristocracy? Yes. Is it wealthier than the aristocracy?
Yes.
Did they have political power? No. 1848, that changes. 1848 is the year of revolutions. There's like 15 revolutions in 1848. Almost all of them fail. In fact, France is the only one that's successful. France has, I believe, their 3rd revolution.
How many revolutions are there?
I said 15, but it's more than that. It's pretty much every place in Europe. Some of these, right, like, you know, like, there's a revolution in the German city-state of Waldeck Does that really matter? Probably not. But they have a revolution. I would say it's probably, at least 30 revolutions happening in Europe at this time. This revolution starts on the island of Sicily, in the kingdom of two Sicilies, governed out of Naples. It's when Sicily erupts into a revolution. Very quickly, it's not that the revolution itself spreads. It's not like some Sicilian dude goes to France and is like, revolution. It's people see, whoa, news arrives. There's revolution in Sicily, and the French workers are saying like, hey, wait a second, us too, right? And all of Europe is engulfed. Almost every single revolution seeks the goal of creating a republic that is led by the middle class. They're seeking to create liberal democracies. The only one that succeeds is France. France becomes a republic again. Its second republic. Anybody know what republic France is currently on? Yep, it's the Fifth Republic. Anybody know what republic we're on? Second. If we really wanted to be European about this, we'd call our government the Second American Republic. The first was the Articles of Confederation. It was perfect. We just need something more perfect.
But it wasn't actually perfect.
No. That's my favorite thing about the Constitution. What a weird thing to have your favorite thing about the Constitution. But I love the fact that their criticism of the previous government is that it was perfect. They just want to create a more perfect one. It's literally the political version of saying infinity plus one.
Yeah.
In order to create a more perfect union.
That's such an American thing, though.
I know. It's so respectful to the previous government too, isn't it? It's like, oh, the articles were so perfect. We're just gonna do something different now that's more perfect.
Yeah, we want a new government.
Okay, the outcomes of this. We get the Second French Republic. Fun fact, this one becomes an empire too, also led by Napoleon. France. The third doesn't. The Third Republic's destroyed by the Nazis. The Fourth Republic is destroyed by the Algerian War of Independence, and the Fifth Republic's still around. This is, feudalism is like dead. No more feudalism. Yay! Feudalism is done. All of Germany, no more feudalism. Austria, no more feudalism. Prussia, Austria, I mentioned that. Denmark, no more feudalism. Switzerland becomes its modern version of itself. Yeah, sweet. Yeah. Neutrality. Britain becomes, you have what is known as the Chartist movement. That ultimately, the Chartist movement in of itself fails, but like about 10 years later, everything the Chartist movement wants becomes law. Mainly what they wanted is to drop the property requirement for voting. And 10 years after this, you no longer need to own property to vote in Britain. You just need to be a dude. Sorry, ladies. You have to wait till like 1922.
So inclusive. Now you don't have to own land.
I
Yeah.
have a question.
Yes.
So, how do you get to vote in Britain now?
You have to be of a certain age and be a British citizen. It's like here.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but
It's like I can't just go over there and decide to vote.
I think you have to be a citizen. Oh, one important thing that'll come up in the next chapter. This is the official break between liberals and socialists. Despite what you may hear on Sean Hannity, they are not the same thing. It always cracks me up when you hear people. I have a very conservative uncle. He's a great guy. I don't necessarily agree with a lot of his opinions, but he's a wonderful, wonderful dude. And he's always like, it's like, I remember, so he's like, that dang Obama, he's almost a communist, And I'm like, wow, he's a communist? He's a really bad communist.
He's really bad.
Like, he needs to go back and reread Marx, because there's a whole lot of capitalism going on in the Obama administration. I wonder if he's aware. Liberals and socialists are very different things.
Yeah.
Even socialists in America, okay, I'm not trying to pick up Bernie here, but when Bernie says Bernie's not a socialist. He's what is called a social democrat. He does not believe in democratic socialism. He is not a Marxist. If Bernie was a socialist, where's this call for like the redistribution of wealth and the nationalization of industry? I haven't heard him call for that. So.
You should have a talk show.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, we use this term wrong, and it's largely a holdover of the Cold War, right? Okay, so liberals and socialists have a bad breakup. They have not yet reconciled. And then nationalism spreads everywhere. The biggest thing of all, did I mention, we also get Austria-Hungary. That's pretty cool. The Hungarians are like, no more being second-class citizens. And the Habsburgs are like, cool, we now have a new country, Austria-Hungary.
Austria is.
No, Austrians and Hungarians. It's so the Emperor of Austria becomes the King of Hungary too, and Hungary gets its own parliament. So it's known as the dual monarchy. I guess we'll talk about Italy and Germany tomorrow. I really wanted to get to it today, but we'll talk about it tomorrow. Because Italy becomes a thing, that's cool. Germany becomes a thing, that's really cool.
Here, 2 world wars.
I feel like Germany would be a great country to live in nowadays. Everybody I know who's visited Germany say it's like the most like America in Europe. They also have great food. I would die if I lived in Germany. Like, I would have heart problems. Everything's like fried in butter. Everything. Even the beer is fried in butter.
Wait, seriously? How do you?
No. That would be the other problem with living in Germany is like all the like wonderful German beer.
Good thing I don't drink.
Good, yeah. So you can visit Germany. I can't.
Well, they have better healthcare too. So
That's what I feel like, yeah.
won't get you as fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but all the German chocolate.
It's probably like forced
I
exercise.
would just be all like.
Get up, Hans, it's time to go. I said do push-ups. I like how Germans in my mind go from being like these party people. Yeah, Germany is fun time, right? To like just scary.
I thought that was
It's like
your-
there's only two sides of a German personality.
I thought
It's
that
like,
was
there's
his Netherlands
beats and
voice.
techno music, right? Or they're it's like, you would not like a city of magic.
And then there's Oktoberfest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Find you out.
That's really true.
Just like, I want to go to
It's very
Germany so
Hegelian.
bad.
Yeah. I want to go to all of Europe. Just like the one once more. That's
Yeah, let's just go to Munich and listen. Let's just go to München and listen to the folk
A lot
music.
of money.
The folk music. They bring in the Americana, Bob Dylan. The Americana, Bob Dylan. He come in, he play his folk song for us.
So is Volkswagen is just people like
Yes, it is. It means people car. People car. Yeah. One of the few things. It was a Nazi thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Hitler wanted every German family to have their own car. And so the Beetle, in fact, the Volkswagen Beetle was designed by the Nazis. None of them were produced until after World War II. But up until like 1956, you got these stamps. The Nazi government gave people stamps, and you had enough of these stamps, you fill out a booklet, and you turn that stamp booklet in, they give you a car, right? They still honored that until like the 1950s because a lot of people had accumulated these stamps from like 1933 onward. The downside is you had Hitler. I don't know if that's a trade-off, right? Like, hey, I get a free car, but Hitler comes with it. This is one kind of outweighs the other.
I know which one.
Yeah. Bad guy, Hitler. See ya. We'll talk about Italy and Germany tomorrow, and then we'll start the Industrial Revolution. Bring work clothes. We're going to start a factory.
I would too.
See you, man.
Well,